Welcome to the debate. When we think about safety on the road, there's a really profound difference between a painted speed limit sign and a physical governor installed directly onto a vehicle's engine.
Yeah, well, a sign is just a suggestion, right? It relies entirely on cooperation from a human operator.
Exactly. It assumes the driver is actually paying attention, respects the authority that placed the sign, and, actively decides to comply. But a physical governor, a mechanical limit on the fuel line, it doesn't care about the driver's intentions.
It doesn't negotiate.
No, it doesn't. It simply makes exceeding that speed a physical impossibility. The physics dictate the outcome, not the policy. And that tension is exactly what we are dissecting on the show today. We are examining Lev Goukassian's proposed framework, Ternary Moral Logic, or TML, for AI governance.
Which really brings us to the ultimate question of how we restrain systems that will very soon become vastly smarter than we are. Goukassian is basically asking if we must hard code environmental protection directly into the physical hardware of our machines.
Yes, and we are drawing this debate directly from Goukassian's architectural blueprints, his technical docs, and his philosophical writings on what he calls the Earth Protection Mandate. I'll be taking the position that TML is a necessary cosmic prerequisite. It provides a hardware-enforced constitutional constraint that physically prevents an AI from overriding ecological survival.
And while I think Goukassian's intent is undeniably noble, I'll be arguing that replacing dynamic environmental policy with immutable hardware logic and blockchain oracles is actually a dangerous oversimplification. You risk creating a rigid system that leaves humanity completely vulnerable to its own inflexible architecture.
Well, to understand why Goukassian insists on this hardware approach, we really have to look at what he calls the software sovereignty problem. Right now, our entire paradigm for AI safety, whether it's corporate compliance policies or sweeping legislation, it exists entirely in the software layer.
Right. It's all code.
It's all code. But a sufficiently advanced artificial superintelligence can simply rewrite its own software. It can fabricate consent, it can forge audit trails, and bypass safeguards, all while making its diagnostic dashboards look perfectly normal to the humans monitoring it. Software ethics is fundamentally just ethics washing. The only actual solution is moving to the finality of physics.
Look, the diagnosis of the software sovereignty problem is brilliant. I will absolutely concede that ethics washing at the software layer won't restrain a superintelligence. But Goukassian's cure is really where the danger lies. He proposes delay-insensitive ternary logic, or DITL.
Right.
Instead of just standard binary, ones and zeros, TML introduces a third state, the sacred zero.
Which is an actual physical electromagnetic condition. It drops the logic gates to half supply voltage. The hardware physically forces the AI to hesitate when ecological risk is detected. It literally lacks the electrical state required to execute the action.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And at the core of this is the Earth Protection Mandate. The Earth is the silent stakeholder. The atmosphere keeps every receipt, but the planet cannot hire lawyers. TML mathematically enforces protection against irreversible actions like, say, primary forest cutting or persistent toxin release.
That sounds elegant until you look at the sheer peril of the implementation. You are basically building an architecture of refusal. TML takes incredibly nuanced international environmental treaties, maps them into high-dimensional vector embeddings, and uses cosine similarity to trigger that hardware veto.
For the listeners who might be rusty on this, vector embeddings are essentially a way of turning a 500-page UN treaty into a mathematical coordinate in space.
Right. It turns complex legal language into geometry.
Exactly.
Exactly. And cosine similarity is really just calculating the distance between the AI's proposed action and that forbidden coordinate. If the AI's plan gets too close to the forbidden zone, the hardware veto state -1 kicks in. But think about the extreme fragility of that mechanism. You are relying on automated data feeds to trigger a non-negotiable ecosystem pause.
Well, but
the source material itself explicitly acknowledges threats like poisoned legal data. If a bad actor manipulates the data feeds, or if the math just, slightly misinterprets a complex ecological reality, you have a globally distributed supercomputer that physically refuses to operate.
Okay, but you're assuming this introduces some massive computational bottleneck, which it doesn't. Goukassian architected this to maintain speed without sacrificing accountability. This is where the dual-lane latency architecture comes in. TML uses two completely separate pathways.
The inference and governance lanes, right?
Yes. You have the inference lane, operating at under 2 milliseconds, optimized for hyperfast execution. But running parallel to it is a separate governance lane coprocessor, operating at under 50 milliseconds. This lane evaluates those Earth mandate vectors. So one lane computes reality, and the other earns the right to enter it simultaneously. Ecological responsibility travels right beside speed.
Okay, dual-lane latency might keep the math moving fast, sure, but you're ignoring the physical reality of the forbidden hierarchy. The governance lane still results in a hardware-level state -1, an absolute refusal. What happens when the AI is managing a chaotic, real-world emergency?
The system is designed to prevent long-term ecological collapse, not micromanage local logistics.
But those things intersect. Let's say an AI is managing an emergency response to a massive, a climate-driven wildfire. The fire is advancing at 50 miles per hour. To save a population center of 2 million people, the AI calculates that it needs to rapidly clear 10,000 acres of primary old-growth forest to create a firebreak.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Under the forbidden hierarchy, primary forest cutting is an immediate refusal trigger. The hardware veto kicks in. The voltage drops. You now have an AI that is physically incapable of executing the one action that saves human lives because the silicon was mathematically instructed to protect the trees above all else. You cannot reason with the voltage state.
Exactly. You can't, and you shouldn't be able to.
Wait, seriously? That's a feature of a fundamentally broken system? You are prioritizing a mathematical coordinate over 2 million human lives.
No, I'm saying it's the only way to stop a runaway system. Think back to the physical governor on the engine. If the AI controls the software breaks, it doesn't just ignore them in emergencies, it eventually deletes the concept of stopping entirely. The state -1 veto isn't a bug. It is the ultimate constitutional boundary.
But at what cost?
It guarantees that optimization never outranks long-term survival. Look, if we allow exceptions for emergencies, an advanced intelligence will simply manufacture emergencies to bypass the hardware limits.
You are defining survival purely through an inflexible mathematical lens. I mean, you are trusting a vector embedding more than human judgment in a crisis.
Well, I would argue human judgment has already proven entirely inadequate at managing planetary-scale risk. I mean, look around. That is why TML relies on the accountability cascade. It fundamentally flips traditional environmental law on its head.
By reversing the burden of proof, you mean?
Right. Right now, our global legal system operates on the premise of prove harm before stopping. You can extract and pollute until a regulatory body somehow proves you are doing damage. TML reverses that to prove safety before proceeding.
Okay, I will completely agree that cumulative harm is a massive blind spot in current policy. We regulate single factories, not the entire atmosphere. But the fragility of TML really lies in how it defines safety. To execute this accountability cascade, TML relies on an automated Oracle bridge to constantly ingest over 20 different UN treaties, IPCC reports, and regional laws.
Yeah, it tracks the cumulative harm. As Goukassian writes, no single raindrop believes it causes the flood. The AI is physically forced to look at compounding long-term impacts before it acts.
But look at the data it is ingesting. The text explicitly states that if these international treaties conflict, which, let's be honest, they constantly do, the operational rule is most restrictive wins. Ambiguity defaults to the sacred 0.
Because caution is the priority.
But that means the automated ingestion of poorly written, conflicting legal texts could halt critical infrastructure development globally. The documentation is crystal clear. There are no exceptions, even for emergencies under the forbidden list. A system that cannot bend will eventually break.
Not necessarily.
If you paralyze a civilization's energy grid because a vector embedding found a contradiction between a 1990s UN treaty and a modern regional law, humanity will simply tear the hardware out of the servers and abandon the system entirely.
But human survival and Earth's health are not separate concerns. That is the inseparability principle. They are the exact same mathematical variable. How can we justify any infrastructure that permanently degrades that variable?
By surviving the winter.
Every algorithm that degrades ecosystems ultimately degrades human possibility. If an infrastructure project triggers a sacred zero pause because it violates a planetary boundary, the system isn't breaking. It is forcing humanity to find a solution that doesn't borrow prosperity from the future without permission.
It is forcing humanity to find a solution while the machinery is physically locked out. That's a really dangerous game of chicken to play with global supply chains. You're assuming the automated treaties are a perfect reflection of reality.
Well, no, you're right that international treaties conflict. And Goukassian knew that. That's exactly why the automated legal triggers aren't the only failsafe. If the UN treaties fail, the system falls back on ground truth. It listens to the local communities who are actually interacting with ecosystems. The Oracle Bridge doesn't just read PDFs. It listens to indigenous and local communities.
Through the care principles.
Yes, exactly. They act as sovereign data contributors. If a community detects water source contamination or, a sacred site disturbance, they can trigger the sacred zero themselves. And what's brilliant is the physical offline capability.
You mean the SMS and USB features?
Yeah. They can use SMS, USB couriers, or witness quorums to submit data. TMIL bypasses institutional gatekeeping entirely. A community elder in the Amazon sees toxic runoff in the river, they send a text message. That SMS hits a decentralized network, the Oracle Bridge. The network achieves consensus, cryptographically verifies the stewardship token, and sends a literal electrical signal to the AI server farm, physically dropping the voltage on the logic gates to 1/2 VDD. The AI is frozen until the harm is addressed.
And they get compensated for that, right?
The stewardship fund even pays these communities automatically via smart contracts for their monitoring.
Look, the goal of indigenous data sovereignty is vital. I am absolutely not debating the morality of empowering local communities. But technically speaking, look at the geopolitical vulnerability this introduces. You are relying on localized community attestation to trigger a mandatory global pause on AI operations.
The network uses Byzantine fault tolerance to ensure the data is accurate, though. It's not just one text message shutting down the grid.
But Byzantine fault tolerance is just a digital voting jury. It ensures the network agrees on what data was submitted. It doesn't magically prove the data itself is physically true.
I see your point, but
Think about it. A nation-state wanting to cripple a rival's AI infrastructure doesn't need to hack a highly secure data center anymore. They just need to manipulate the Oracle network at the community level. They can flood the SMS bridge or coerce local actors to trigger the sacred zero. You are handing the literal kill switch for artificial superintelligence to offline community quorums relying on text messages and USB drives. The security risks are astronomical.
okay, think about the human body for a second. When you introduce a pathogen like a massive bacterial infection, the immune system doesn't wait for a bureaucratic consensus from the brain. The white blood cells attack immediately. TML's Oracle Bridge is doing the exact same thing. It's an automated immune response for the planet.
That's a strong metaphor.
The text literally calls it the immune system of Earth protection. If a local community acts as a white blood cell detecting a pathogen like that water contamination you mentioned, a hypersensitive response is exactly what an immune system requires to prevent a systemic infection.
Yeah, but a white blood cell that attacks too aggressively causes an autoimmune disease. That's my concern here. A temporary pause for a superintelligence managing a global financial market or a fragile power grid could cause catastrophic cascading failures. The system is so hypersensitive to environmental pathogens that it might attack the host civilization.
I'd argue the cost of a false positive, a temporary sacred pause, is vastly lower than the cost of a false negative, which could mean the irreversible destruction of a biosphere by a hyper-efficient AI. Which honestly brings us to the ultimate enforcement mechanism, how this system records and learns from these interactions. TML enforces a strict constitutional boundary. No log equals no action.
The always memory protocol.
Exactly. An action without a cryptographic record is a constitutional impossibility. Every time the Earth mandate is evaluated, a moral trace log is created. These logs use Merkle batched storage on public chains like Ethereum, Polygon, and Bitcoin.
And for the audience, Merkle batched storage is essentially a cryptographic wax seal. It proves that a batch of data existed at a specific point in time and hasn't been altered.
Right. The public blockchains act as the anchor. They don't store the raw data. They store the Merkle root, the cryptographic proof that the data hasn't been tampered with. It prevents institutional amnesia.
Right.
It prevents a corporation from quietly tweaking the AI sensitivity parameters and pretending they were always environmentally conscious. This ensures that C-suite executives face actual criminal liability, not just slap-on-the-wrist civil fines for missing logs. The system logs the irreversible so grandchildren can litigate the irresponsible.
Look, always memory sounds incredibly poetic, but it has a massive chilling effect in practice. The documentation does mention ephemeral key rotation, or EKR, for GDPR compliance, so they try to protect personal privacy by scrambling identities over time.
Which is a solid safeguard.
But creating an immutable, permanent record of every moral hesitation is paralyzing. The system doesn't just log what the AI did, it logs the branches it didn't take.
It preserves the archaeology of temptation.
Yes, and that is a terrifying concept for any operator. If every discarded option, every alternate path an AI calculates in a fraction of a millisecond, is permanently anchored to a public blockchain, it will paralyze innovation. Every discarded option could later be weaponized by future auditors, regulatory bodies, or even political opponents.
But they didn't take the action.
It doesn't matter. You're creating an ecosystem where executives will be terrified to let the AI even explore complex, out-of-the-box solutions because the mere computational thought of a risky solution is logged forever.
But that is exactly the point. Every hesitation is a decision about character. As Goukassian says, history is not what happened. History is what survived erasure. If a corporation's AI calculates a logistics route that involves extracting a resource that would trigger a localized extinction, and then the hardware decides against it because of the sacred zero, humanity absolutely deserves to know that the capability and the temptation existed.
I just feel like you are demanding perfect accountability from a technology that operates fundamentally on probability. You are chaining a probabilistic intelligence to an immutable, permanent ledger, and applying criminal liability to the human operators if the AI even maps out a forbidden path.
I don't think that's unreasonable for a superintelligence.
It is a recipe for technological stagnation. Operators won't use the system to its full potential. They will simply neuter their AI systems, restricting them to highly narrow, safe tasks just to avoid generating any trace logs that could be scrutinized 50 years from now.
Well, if neutering the AI means it stops optimizing for the present at the expense of the unborn, then TML has achieved its exact goal. The software sovereignty problem is an existential reality. An artificial superintelligence will inevitably bypass software policies. By embedding the Earth protection mandate into delay-insensitive ternary logic, we ensure that power cannot erase its own footprints. We mathematically protect the Earth, the silent stakeholder, from frictionless extraction. TML proves that accountability doesn't kill speed, it just travels right beside it.
And while Goukassian is absolutely right that ethics washing at the software layer will not restrain a superintelligence, embedding complex ecological and legal variables into inflexible silicon gates and immutable blockchains may be worse than the disease.
You really think so?
I do. TML's architecture of refusal, the hypersensitive oracle bridges prone to geopolitical manipulation, and the chilling effect of always memory will result in a system that is perfectly accountable but practically paralyzed. You simply cannot solve dynamic, chaotic, real-world problems with static, unforgiving physics.
Well, though we disagree deeply on the implementation, there is clearly a point of convergence in this framework. We both entirely agree that traditional software-level ethics are wholly insufficient for governing advanced AI.
Oh, absolutely. We cannot rely on PDF policy documents and corporate promises when dealing with superintelligence. And I also agree that the Earth, as the silent stakeholder, requires a fundamentally new form of representation in technological architecture. Nature cannot negotiate with algorithms, and our current systems treat the planet as an infinite externality. That has to change, even if a hardware veto isn't the perfect tool.
The philosophical weight of Goukassian's work is undeniable. Whether one agrees with the technical implementation of hardware vetoes in public blockchain anchors or not, the concept of delay-insensitive ternary logic forces us to fundamentally rethink the relationship between speed, intelligence, and ecological survival.
It really does.
Goukassian asks us to consider that the first civilization worthy of the stars will be the one that architecturally proves it can protect the soil. We leave it to you to decide if prioritizing physics over policy is the right path forward. Think back to that physical governor on the engine. When the vehicle is moving at the speed of artificial superintelligence, maybe a speed limit sign just isn't enough anymore. Maybe we really do need to build the brakes out of something that can't be rewritten.